Today is Tuesday, September 27, 2011. This is the second class meeting that we're having, and the class listened to the lecture from last year for the first class meeting, and we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of forensic interviewing. And I was just making the observation that in order to be a competent forensic interviewer, you need to understand all of the disciplines that surround investigation of child maltreatment. And it's not about being a prosecutor or being a law enforcement person or being a child protective service worker. It's about understanding and appreciating all of those disciplines as well as a lot more. And that means we need to appreciate how kids grow, how they develop, how their brains develop, how their thinking develops, how they look at the world around them, how they interact with adults, how they acquire language, how they develop in terms of expressing themselves to other people. We need to have a basic understanding, perhaps more than a basic understanding, of a lot of different aspects of children's experience. And as I may have mentioned, class 1, I don't recall, but it's worth repeating again. We don't interview children, we interview a child. And what we mean by that is, and this is getting even more specific, not only must we understand how children develop, how they think, how they experience the world around them, how they express themselves, but we need to understand as much as we can about this child and how they think, how their language developed, what is their cultural experience, what is their house like. The more we know about children's development and how they interact with the world generally, the more we know about the specific child and their specific life's experience and how they or this child interacts with the world, the better we're going to be at communicating with them. And we need to reach that point with the child that we interview where we are engaged, where they are expressing themselves and we're getting it. And we are expressing ourselves through the use of questions or other communication, and they're getting it. And it's easier said than done, I imagine. So, you could be the savviest cop in all of police work, or you could be the most seasoned child protection worker, or the fanciest psychologist in the entire university. And that's only one part of what it takes. You need to know a little bit about law enforcement. You need to know a little bit about child protection. You need to know a little bit about families and how they think and how they act and how kids interact with their own families. So I can't overstate how important it is for the person who ultimately interviews a child to understand that child and their own unique experience. And unique is a word that's thrown around too loosely these days. But when it comes to the child that you're with, they're unique. They're unique. Unique means there ain't nobody else or nothing else in the whole world that's exactly the same. And that's true. So we need to kind of peel apart the layers of that child's life and experience and ability. Now, the problem is, it sounds like a lot of work and a lot of stuff to know and do, but the closer we can get to knowing as much as we can about all those discrete parts of that child's experience, the better the outcome of the interview. The better the outcome of the interview. And the way I measure the outcome of the interview is as follows. The most information, so you want to get the highest quantity of information and the highest quality information. So it's not helpful if we get a kid saying a lot of stuff, but most of it is fantastic, or some of it is deceptive, or some of it is unintelligible, right? So it's not about quantity, it's about quality as well. So you want to get the most information. A good forensic interview gets a lot of stuff, a lot of information, and that information is of the highest quality. Now, never is it perfect? Well, that was a weird way to express that. It's never perfect. The information that we get from children's never complete. It's never 100% accurate. And when I say it's not 100% accurate, I'm not suggesting that kids are deceptive. Sometimes they are. It's really overrated by defense lawyers and people who are skeptical of children's abilities. But it's not accurate because there's so many ways that we can misinterpret what a child's trying to express. When I say we, the adults. And most child advocates, most credible child advocates, most credible forensic interviewers live by the following standard. If there's a mistake, if there's an error, if a child expresses something that later turns out to be wrong, or later turns out to be demonstrably not correct, or somehow the information that we rely upon is mixed up or confused, it's never their fault, it's always our fault. Because we're dealing with children. They are, by definition, lacking in the competence of adults. We can only hold them to the standard of childhood, not of adult competence. And that is the problem. Because we expect, not the problem, but that's the challenge. We expect that these children, who by definition are challenging, are going to express themselves in a way that is courtroom ready, that is a nice fit for an adult construct or an adult process, the criminal or civil courts. And you may say, well, my cases, they're not about court. Oh, yes, they are. They're about court. Now, they may not be about the criminal courts, but every one of your cases, and I'm speaking collectively with the assumption that most of you are child protective service workers, DYFS workers. In order to take any action, you need to do a few things as a child protection worker, whether you're working in Washington State or Maine or the Panhandle of Florida or San Diego. You need to find, by your standard, that abuse or neglect occurred. But just because you found it doesn't mean you can intervene. Now, you need to find it, and then you need to intervene. Why do we intervene? We want to protect the child from future harm. We want to minimize risk to this child of future harm and of the siblings, right? We want to intervene with the family to also minimize risk and educate the caregivers and try to alleviate the potential for future harm. We want to make this family function better. Why? Well, it's good for society. It's good that people grow up healthy and wise and contribute to society. It also minimizes risk. A good functioning family is one that is going to be less likely abusive. So you want to do all those things, and I'm paraphrasing what your mission is, but you want to do all those things. You need to make a finding of abuse or neglect, and then you need to get them to cooperate. And many people fold and simply cooperate because they don't want their babies taken away. And that is a rather crude way of saying what the perception is by many of our clients, child protective service clients. That's the unstated or implied leverage that every worker has. And very often it works. They may cooperate somewhat, maybe fully, maybe somewhere in between. So some people voluntarily do what we ask them, and some people don't. And where do those people wind up? In a courtroom. In a courtroom. And among those, some people can be the child, or certainly the child's statements, the information that we got from a child. So, forensic interviewing is about getting the most information and the highest quality information from children so that we can defend it in the courtroom or present it successfully in the courtroom. I always think about how I characterize things. I often say we want to have the ability to do forensically defensible interviews. But that seems like we have to defend our interviews. How about doing successful interviews, or doing interviews that are quality interviews rather than forensically defensible? But either way, that's what we're trying to do here. We want to make sure that the information that we develop from the children is persuasive in a forensic context. And a forensic context simply means an illegal proceeding. The main definition of forensic is related to legal proceedings. When we last met, I did a couple of days training up in Morris County for 40 child protection workers. We did finding words for DYFS at the Morris County Police Academy, and I expressed the same sentiment to that group. I wanted to make it clear that I'm not, when I say I, me, the program, the finding words, the law enforcement involvement in training of child protection workers isn't designed to deputize DYFS workers or child protective workers. We don't want to turn you into police officers, okay? We appreciate that the end game, the purpose of our disciplines is different in the end, okay? But what we also appreciate is that in the beginning, it's nearly precisely the same. At the beginning, we must gather persuasive information about abuse or neglect. You cannot help the family or minimize risk or minimize potential harm to that child and siblings. You cannot help repair that family without demonstrating abuse or neglect. You cannot take action unless you're satisfied by the division standard of preponderance of the evidence that abuse or neglect happened, or substantiation, to use the term for further action within child protection. Unless you can substantiate, you can't do what's your mission. Protect this kid, siblings, help the family, etc. Same thing with law enforcement. Unless we can develop information by our standard of proof, which is more significant, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. Nevertheless, we're all in the information gathering business. And we want to make sure both of us, law enforcement, medicine, doesn't the physician, the only persons who, among our working group, if you will, among the interdisciplines that deal with child maltreatment, medicine, child protection, municipal police, prosecutors, and I separate those because prosecutors go to court and municipal police investigate, although there's overlap. Right? Child advocacy centers, regional diagnostic centers, mental health professionals. Now, among all those folks, the only group that is not completely interested in the objective truth, the historical truth, or what really happened, is mental health. Now, they need to know what happened. If they know what happened, if they know how this child was molested, how many times they were molested, who molested them, who abused them, it certainly informs their response to this child or family's mental health needs. But even if the people are misleading or deceptive, or even if they don't know the pure objective truth, they can deal with people's emotions still and still provide treatment. But everybody else, we need to know what happened to the best that we can get that information. A doctor's in a much better position if they know the truth about what happened than if they have to speculate about parts of it. The less credible, the further from the historical truth, the more difficult it is for all of us to do what we need to do. So child protection, we're not here to deputize you. We're not here to talk about forensics because we want you to, adopt the same philosophy that law enforcement has. No. But we want you to, number one, adopt those parts of the investigative strategies of law enforcement that protect the integrity of the information you develop. You know, there's good investigations and there's not good investigations. I don't care who's doing them. There's a good and ideal and optimal way to gather information, and then there's less than optimal. And then there's lousy. Doesn't matter who's doing it. An investigation's an investigation. Now, there are some tools law enforcement has when we talk about investigations a little bit. I think we do that more in Children in Justice, but there are some tools that law enforcement has that child protection doesn't, but very few. Very few. I mean, there's some fancy scientific tools that we use once in a while, fancy lights and fingerprints and things like that. But there's very little. Most of the information that I'm talking about is just by knowing how to talk to people and who to talk to and when to talk to them. So the information gathering phase, there's a good way to do it and a not so good way to do it. Don't matter who's doing it. And there we're on common ground. When I say we, law enforcement and child protection are on the same ground. And that's why forensic interviewing is relevant to child protection. All forensic interviewing means, right, Franklin, is related to legal proceedings. And everything you do is related to legal proceedings. Because like we started out by saying, if the family is not cooperative and you need to protect, you're going to wind up in a courtroom. And the family court hallways are, teeming with DAGs in my county, deputies, attorney generals. In those cases where the families aren't cooperative, in those cases where immediate action needs to take place, in those cases where there's a DOD filed, or an emergent application in order to show cause, a fact-finding. All of these things implicate legal proceedings. Thus, all, and most of you were intake from my recollection a few weeks ago. You're forensic investigators. Simple as that. Now, your mission is, in the end, when you gather reliable information, is to act quite differently from law enforcement. Our role is punitive, mostly. We're there to punish, hold people responsible, and make examples of people. That's the criminal justice system. Punish, hold that punishment out so others can see it, so they don't do it, and so the guy or gal who we prosecuted doesn't do it again. Deterrence, right? Punishment. And you could throw in rehabilitation, but that is less paramount in 2011 than it's ever been. We are an overly punitive system, some would argue. But clearly it's the major part of law enforcement wherever you go. But in order to be punitive, or in order to repair families, you need to know what the hell happened. And that's forensic. Forensic investigations and forensic interviewing. In order to know what happened, we need to talk to children. Children are not miniature adults. They're growing, living, breathing persons. Each one is unique. And in order to get the best information, we need to understand how they grow, how they think, how they express themselves, how they respond to trauma, and more. Any questions so far? War stories? Observations? Tomatoes you want to throw? Nothing? Well, I want to go back to your first learning module, which was learning module 1, and look at the assignments there. If you recall, there were readings from Professor Fowler, Chapter 1 and Chapter 3, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about now. Chapter 3, Models for Assessing Child Abuse. You don't need to do anything differently, just listen. But you read Chapter 3 a while ago. That's Models for Assessing Child Sexual Abuse. And that's what I'm going to discuss a little bit now Professor Fowler's summary of the different ways that we interview kids. Now, I suggested that we need to be highly sensitive to how kids grow, how they develop, how they think, etc. That we want to make sure that we gather this information in a reliable way, one that's persuasive and defensible. Now, how do you do that? Well, there are basically 4 models that have developed over the past 30 or so years, and Professor Fowler kind of goes through them. The first one she describes as the child interview model. And these are models for assessing child sexual abuse. We're going to talk about physical abuse later in this course and how to ask questions about physical abuse. But the main focus is sexual abuse. Sexual abuse, because of the dearth of evidence and the difficulties kids have talking about human sexuality. The first model that Professor Fowler points us to again is the child interview model. And, this is what you might call the DYFS model of the 70s or 80s. And not DYFS, child protection model. And it focused mainly on interviewing the child. That's why they call it the child interview model. It has its origins in Child Protective Service investigations. And it became the model used in many child advocacy centers around the country. This model is becoming less and less utilized. But it had a lot of traction in the 80s and 90s. And the child interview model, again, was focused on asking the kid what happened and interviewing the child. And as Professor Fowler points out, research findings support the efficacy of this model. And that's a fancy way of saying it works. If you ask the kid what happened, most of the time you'll find out enough of what happened to do what you need to do. She also used a fancy word. I saw it earlier. And I liked it. Like all fancy words, they're hard to work into conversations. And if you do, you really look goofy. Where is that word? That's one thing that's bad about the Kindle. I don't know what page this is on, because they don't have pages. They're going to have pages soon. They use some other. But Professor Fowler says, this is the most parsimonious of models and the most widely employed. And if you highlight a word here, it tells you the definition. And it means unwilling to spend money, economical, doesn't use a lot of resources. So next time you're on a date and the man doesn't reach deep in his pocket, you don't want to offend him too much. Say, hey, Alex, you're being a bit parsimonious today at the restaurant. The house wine, no good. And by the time he looks it up, you have had a good meal and changed your number. And it is parsimonious. It is economical. You interview the kid, and that's the thing, that's the case. You interview the kid, you find out what they have to say, and you go forward. And in busy jurisdictions, and in busy centers, in urban centers, in the Children's Advocacy Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, or where there's a lot of action, a lot of kids, and a lot of work, very efficient, right? Talk to the kid, find out what happened, find out if something happened, and you move on to the next kid in the next case. So it is efficient. And the research suggests that it is it has efficacy, which means it works. It results in disclosures in about 2/3 to 3/4 of the kids who were interviewed in some studies. Now, Professor Fowler also makes the observation that these kinds of single kid interviews, which he calls the child interview model, are most effective and probably only effective with children who have already disclosed sexual abuse, children who are older, and children who were abused by a non-parental figure. Now, those of you who have been doing this, or those of you who have done your readings, or have an appreciation of this field, are most of the kids that Child Protection sees or that law enforcement interviews, have most of them made a disclosure or statement to someone else before they wind up at our doorstep? What's your experience? Or most of them didn't tell anybody, and we just go ask them to come to our office and we feel like interviewing them. They made a disclosure, yeah. The vast majority of them have made a disclosure. In fact, the only way that we would interview kids who've not made a disclosure is if there's a strong suspicion. And we got enough kids who told us what happened. Never mind kids who didn't say anything. So we're not going to go out of our way to interview kids who didn't say anything unless there's a real strong suspicion of abuse. Someone tell me a strong suspicion scenario. Kid never told anyone.
Maybe a disease?
Yes. What kind of disease?
Sexually transmitted?
Yeah, a kid that's got an STD. Gonorrhea, syphilis, genital warts, whatever. Chlamydia. And there are different confidences we have in whether it's sexual abuse depending upon a disease. But if they have an STD, whatever it is, it's cause for concern and for further inquiry. And we were going to interview that kid. What's another example of a situation where a child will be interviewed even though they've never made a disclosure? Go ahead.
Afraid of being alone with either the parent, either the mother or the father.
So a child who has exhibited fear of being alone with either caregiver?
Yes.
Okay, how would you stumble upon that, though? I mean, how does that get to the office?
It depends. Might not want to go home after school because they say the father might be picking up the mother from picking them up after school. It's either the day that the father is visiting or...
So a sharp educator might pick up on this reluctance to be with one parent or the other and call it in? Okay. Well, if we knew that, and I think that would be, I don't know how common that is, but if we know that, that's cause for concern. I would agree. Go ahead, ma'am. Yeah.
A child that either displays knowledge beyond his or her years about sexual activity, or a child who displays sort of dysfunctional sexual activity himself. Not dysfunctional, but inappropriate. Like
Yeah.
In a school setting. Or something.
Yeah. Well, we're going to look at unhealthy sexual behaviors in a little while. It was among your readings by Professor Rich. Yes. So it's been suggested that if we become aware of a child who is engaging in sexually precocious behavior, behavior that's sexual beyond their years, whether they be saying things or doing things, they may never have disclosed, but it's cause for concern. Yes.
A child that's pregnant.
A child that's what?
Pregnant.
Yes. That would be beyond the suspicion, though. That would be 100%. Well, I guess they could have.
They would say that they didn't have sex because they view like being raped by someone as not having sex. Like, if I had that happen before.
Well, I'm assuming that you're talking about a child that's under 16 or 13. If you have a child under 13 that's pregnant,
I mean, they didn't disclose.
that's child. There's going to be child abuse.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Unless it was a
disclosure,
12-year-old.
It was that they just kept saying, "Well, I didn't have sex," so it wasn't really a disclosure because they didn't look at them being raped as having sex.
Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Why does it have to be child abuse with a child under certain age?
Well, because I qualify that by saying unless it was a 12-year-old,
Oh, I didn't hear that.
yeah, unless the impregnator was a 12-year-old or an age mate. So it's not 100% true what I said, but it's, if they're under 13, under our law, you cannot consent in any situation. And if you become pregnant, barring an age mate or a peer, it would be abuse. But no, I was wrong. It wouldn't be abuse always. No. If it was an age mate or a peer, it would not be abuse. Depending on, you know what? And we get these cases where the female child is 12 and the male child, not pregnancy cases, but the male is 11 or they're both 12. They all want to charge the boy. And maybe that's right, but I'm just saying, okay, but why? Why are we charging the boy? Why anyone getting charged, I'm not so sure there needs to be charges in any of those cases. They need to be scrutinized. But forgetting about the propriety of charging at all, I just find it interesting that it's charge the boy. Yes.
Physical signs, like, for example, possibly a baby, a female child, there are clear tears on the private area of the baby, or...
Well, there might be some medical evidence you're saying discovered. There might be some, in other words, the child might go to the pediatrician or the doctor or the family doctor, and they may see some evidence that's suspicious, but the child never has not made a disclosure yet. And that might be a situation too. Go ahead.
Child pornography, like the child's identified in a picture or something.
Yes. Sadly, we get those, and they have not yet disclosed. And we interview them, and we see if they made a disclosure. I started out by saying, what would be a situation where we interviewed a kid who never disclosed? And all of these would be those kinds of cases. Because we have a suspicion. There's a strong suspicion. Go ahead.
If the offender confesses.
Yeah, if the offender confesses. And give me an example of how that might go down. And that's true, but I got one in my head, and there's probably 2 or 3 ways that might happen.
Well, maybe even in a school setting,
Uh-huh.
he confesses, and let's say it was multiple children.
Uh-huh.
The other children confess to admit that maybe he or that alleged perp sexually abused them, and then there's that one child who doesn't want to disclose anything.
Right. And that could happen in a number of different contexts. You used a school setting, but in other words, you're saying maybe a couple of kids at school say, oh, the janitor fondled us or did something to us. And then we interview the janitor, and he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I did it. I fondled them, and I fondled Mary and Jane, and I fondled Alicia and Domenica and Gabriella. So you have the 2 victims that disclosed. He confesses to them, and he gives us more victims. I don't want to say it's common, but it happens frequently. More often, we get additional siblings or relatives. We'll bring the guy in because of, he molested Mary, and we find out about a cousin that he molested, or maybe even a sibling. And that sibling may have been debriefed already, or interviewed by DYFS, or even us. When I say us, law enforcement, and denied. And then he gives us that sibling, and then we bring him back again. And denial, as we will visit, and as many of you know already, denial is frequent and common, even in the face of STDs, videos, and we'll talk more about that later. Having said all that, in the vast majority of our cases, the child's already made a disclosure. We're getting it from somewhere. They told a teacher, they told a relative, they told someone else. And the reason I bring this up is because Professor Fowler says when using the child interview model, it works best when a kid already disclosed something. And the kid's older, and the abuser was non-parental. Well, the first scenario is common. Most of our cases, there's an out-of-court state. There's a statement by the child that something happened to someone, and that's how they come to our doorstep. But the other 2 are not always common. It works best with kids who are older. Many of our kids are not older. They're younger. And most of our kids are not. In fact, by definition in child protection, it's rarely a non-parental figure. If it's a non-parental figure, it ain't your case. right? So, the child interview model. Simply interviewing the child. A good model, you think, for us, or not so good model? What do you think?
I think, like we discussed last time, we're kind of using that as the front line. First, we're going out there, call SB or whatever, we'll say, you go out and interview first, and let me know what you find, and then if you find something, you start the next process, the joint investigation process.
Well, you're saying it's happening, and I'm saying is that make it good, though. So, in other words, if you go out and they say nothing happened, that's the end of it. And is that a good thing? Is that something that protects kids? I mean, we're going to get to this later, and many of you have been trained before on this. Not all of you, and I'm not going to assume everyone used DIFUS, but denial or fragmented or piecemeal disclosure is the way kids tell. They tell a little bit, or often they don't tell at all. They deny. So we're not really fulfilling our mission if we're going out asking them whether something happened. They say no, and we go home. It's efficient. It's parsimonious. But is it good? And if it works best with older kids and kids who were molested by a non-parental figure, if we take a look at the research, are we doing what's right? We're using something that's demonstrably not good with younger kids and incest kids. And those are the kids that we deal with most of the time. The request to go out and see what's happening. Now, I know in other counties around New Jersey, it's different. And perhaps a few got away from us in Passaic County, but it's not my operating procedure. The only time I permit our staff to ask the division to go out and see, and we do it too, is where it's ambiguous or unclear on its face. If we get a report, the child is in the guidance counselor's office, she says her uncle Nunzio's in from Sicily, and he stays in the upstairs attic apartment, and he comes and he licks her at night. We're going out immediately. Whether we like it or not, we're going out. We're not going to say, you know what, go check out and see if there really is an Nunzio. What does she mean by licking? That's not ambiguous to me. Now, could it be could the facts be a little bit different once we put it under a brighter light? Maybe. But on referral, a sex crime happened, if true. Now, switch around the facts. Guidance counselor says, I called Gabriella in my office because she seemed rather melancholy recently. She's been a little sad, and she's normally a bright, happy kid, and we have a good relationship. And I called Gabriella in, and she says to me, I'm feeling sad lately, but I don't want to talk about it. And I asked her further, and she said, my Uncle Nunzio came from Sicily, and he's living in the attic apartment. And I said, so what about that? What does that mean? He's creepy. When he goes to the bathroom in the middle of the night, it freaks me out. And he comes right by my room. He's creepy, and sometimes he's really fresh. Well, tell me more about that, or whatever. The guidance counselor pursues a little bit more. I don't know, I don't really want to talk about it anymore. Let's assume she's astute enough, or he's astute enough to call it in. Is there a suspicion there? Why is she, kids don't get creeped and freaked out, normally. Unless something's going on, right? Uncle Nunzio moved in the house, he comes down, he gets fresh with her. What does that mean, right? I'm suspicious. In the middle of the night, he comes and uses the bathroom, he lurks by her room. That's the message I'm getting. And he gets fresh with her. Fresh is sometimes a euphemism for sexual touching, right? Or sexual comments. I get that. but it's still ambiguous, right? It's not solid. I don't quite know. It could be much ado about anything. You know, he could be getting her. What she means by fresh may be something different than we're interpreting. And you can add a fact or two to make it more suspicious, yet still ambiguous, right? He comes in my room and he says stupid shit. Well, what does that mean? Just stupid shit. I don't want to talk about it. Well, what time? I don't know, 2 or 3 in the morning. What is Uncle Nunzio doing in her room 2 or 3 in the morning? Saying stupid shit. He's a creep, he's weird, he's a perv. All that stuff raises the red flag. Not to the high heavens, but it's waving in the wind. I'm going to say, go out to the school or go out or wherever it is you're going to talk to this child. Child protection. Find out what the hell's going on. Because it could be, now going in the room raises it a little bit, but there's not a clear disclosure yet. I don't know what it is yet. That's when in my county, we'll send you out. Now, I know in some counties, if she said, and Uncle Nunzio comes in, he licks me between the legs, they still ask you to go out and find out what's going on, hoping that the kid denies. I guess.
Why do you think that is?
What's that?
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that some law enforcement in some jurisdictions realize that a lot of these cases are built on a very shaky foundation through no fault of law enforcement or child protection or the child themselves. And because of the dynamics of abuse, many of these cases collapse in the early stages, partly because we're not responding properly, and partly because there are dynamics of loyalty and incest and family and culture that are beyond our control. So, some of these law enforcement folks, they know all that. They may not understand why completely it happens and be as savvy as us in appreciating these dynamics. But they know that they're fall apart, these cases, too often. And they, once bitten, twice shy, right? They have a bad experience, and they have multiple bad experiences. I mean, it's, I have to tell you guys, every day is a challenge. Every day you go to work, it's just people are right against you, their kids are recanting, the families don't cooperate, no one returns your calls. Cases collapse left and right, But, that inspires me, man. But most people, it doesn't. Most people just get defeated. And, so they're like, you know what? Go see what's up. If you talk to the kid and the kid stands by her assertion, or it is what it is, and then we'll join in. I bet you perhaps if we did a study, maybe half of the time, and even in a solid disclosure, like Uncle Nunzio comes and licks me between my legs, I would speculate that if you did a study of DIFUS go look see kind of responses, maybe half of them wind up with nothing, denials.
And that work is kind of actually...
And they're happy. Oh, see, half of them wind up for shit. They're lousy cases. So it validates what we're doing, is the way they're saying. I'm asking DIFUS to screen these, is one way to articulate what they're doing. I'm simply having trained child professionals go screen the case. And look at this. I did a study, and in 50% of them, there was much ado about nothing. I'm going to send detectives out, stop the presses, shut down the prosecutor's office, or Elizabeth Police, or Passaic Police, and half the time, these cases implode right at the school. I asked them to go, that's being parsimonious. Right. So that's why, that is the... that's my positive way of interpreting behavior. Okay, cynical way would be they don't give a shit. They don't care. They're lazy. I mean.
Basically, the volume of cases that comes in, say, for example, in Essex,
Right.
in comparison to Mercer County, the number of cases that we receive in Essex is just overwhelming.
Well, Essex County doesn't have a, sad to say, they don't have a immediate response child sexual abuse investigative unit. They rely on the municipalities with support from the Children's Advocacy Center and the prosecutors, detectives. But they don't have, you need 50 prosecutors, detectives to do a competent job. Not a great job, a competent job. They don't have that. That's not their model because of the crushing amount of cases. So they work collaboratively with Glen Ridge Police, Orange Police, Livingston Police, whatever, the towns in Essex, Newark PD. But even if they had significant personnel, the volume of cases is the reason why they want to send people out. That's related to my suggestion about why they don't want to send people out. If they had the luxury of tons of detectives, they wouldn't ask the division to go out. That whole theory about, half these cases collapse, why should I waste my time, even though it's a clear statement of abuse, is about being parsimonious, being efficient, not wasting resources that are limited. And unfortunately, the bottom line is you're mandated to go out. Law enforcement isn't. So anyway, that's how I think they process that or think about that, how they rationalize that. But that's not ideal. That's not optimum. That ensures that kids will be molested again and again, because I made up those numbers, but let's say half of them, hey, nothing happened. Out of that half, probably 90% of them, something did happen, because we know that denial, especially in the school, we know that these kids are in fact abused, but going and screening it results in a denial. Thus, we are ensuring that they go home to an unsafe house and to future molests. So when you get a concrete disclosure, the way to build that case is now. That's a great day when you got a concrete disclosure to us. It's a sad day when it's half of, I don't know, he's creepy, he's weird, he's fresh, I don't know what to do with that. I'm suspect of it. But I can't send out all hands on deck, let's go after this case. But when a kid says Uncle Nunzio comes and licks me between my legs, and if that's the information reported from the school to you and you to us, don't do anything. We're going to go to the school, we're going to pick up the kid, we'll pick up the non-offending caregiver, we'll find out where the guy works, and I got 8 guys, we put 4 of them on it immediately. 2 go look for the guy. You guys, we work collaboratively, you go look for you, we got a role for you, you could do A, B, and C. You could do this, you could do that, and things happen like that. And that leads us to the next. We're talking about Kathleen Fowler, the joint investigation model. That's her chapter 3. Ways of assessing child sexual abuse. The joint investigation model. And, to me, for forensic purposes, this is the ideal. And in the mid-'80s, many states compelled greater cooperation between child protection and law enforcement. I don't believe New Jersey. New Jersey has regulations and rules and other things that foster and encourage collaboration. It's not a statute, though. And these changes that occurred in the 1980s that encouraged and in some states ordered or compelled by law collaboration between child protection and law enforcement happened around the time that the focus moved from mental health problem and family problem to societal problem and criminal law problem. It's the late 70s, early 80s where we began saying, you know what, these cases can't be dealt with within the family. They can't be dealt with solely by social workers. These child molesters and rapists that commit acts of intrafamilial abuse need to be uncovered and they need to be prosecuted. There needs to be punishment. So there was a shift between mental health issues or mental health response, and they prosecuted guys for molesting kids in the 1950s and the 1940s, but it wasn't the predominant way that we dealt with these kind of cases. The vast majority of them were considered family issues, better left for social workers and mental health practitioners. But around the late 70s, early 80s, the shift turned towards a punitive response as well as a mental health response. And that's about when we began to collaborate more, and laws were passed that forced, in some places, collaboration or joint investigation. Now, there's a number of ways that it can happen. Professor Fowler points out that it could involve a co-joint interview by law enforcement and child protection. She says there may be a primary and a secondary interviewer. Somebody does the talking, the other one simply takes notes, and then maybe asking other questions after the first interviewer has exhausted the inquiry. At other times, one person's in the room and the other persons are behind one-way mirrors. Now, Professor Fowler's making these statements based upon research and her experience throughout the years, but most of these strategies have fallen by the wayside because of technological advances. Most of these collaborative interviews are done through the use of a video camera, and they're video recorded. Ain't nobody taking notes, and two people in a room is not ideal, although some people still do that. I don't endorse it. So one-way mirrors are out of fashion. They don't sell very many one-way mirrors anymore. You can buy for $50, you can buy a high-def camera and put chewing gum on the back of it and video record everything and shoot it out to your computer. I mean, technology makes it easy to watch what's going on in another room. So those models were used in the past, but the strategy now is to use a video and to record these interviews, to record them, to document them on video. But historically, as Professor Fowler points out, what's important wasn't how it was done over the years, but that it was done at all. That both child protection and law enforcement had a role in the inquiry or the questioning. Now it's done either through what they call a bug in the ear or a phone or when I was in Chicago, one of the detectives from Morris County was there, and they used text messaging. So she has her phone in there with her, and if they want to give her some tips or add a question or two, they do it through text messaging, and that's parsimonious. The key, though, is that in the joint investigation model, and I'm not only talking about DYFS and law enforcement, DYFS, law enforcement, the municipal police, the prosecutor, they may all be in the other room and participating. Now, they all know the protocol calls for, the interviewer has to go through their interview protocol. And then at the end, people can provide input. Yeah. And even then, among the group, it's collaborative. It's not like, all right, the cops get to ask their questions, and then, there's a group there that is in another room, and they talk to one another, and they come up with questions. What also is the hallmark of the joint investigation model is, as Professor Fowler points out, other people, including the suspect, the non-suspected parent, and other collateral witnesses are all interviewed. And in my county, immediately, or within 24 hours, depending upon availability. And that may be collaborative in the sense that, for example, child protection may, in nearly all of our cases, may go debrief or interview the non-abused siblings or the non-disclosing siblings. We never do that, or very rarely, unless they're a witness. But we know that child protection is mandated to, and it's in our interest to talk to those siblings. So that's kind of how collaterals, or what DYFS calls collaterals, and it's a good word, the collaterals are kind of spread among the disciplines. And typically the division will go get the medical records, help us with that, talk to the kid, the siblings, maybe a grandparent's in the mix or something. And And similarly, law enforcement will interview the suspect. The non-offending caregiver will probably be done by law enforcement, and even maybe grandma or some other persons. But every case is different, so we divide up the work. But there are very real responsibilities in the joint investigation model among the players. And it's a great day when you have child protection, the prosecutor, and the municipal police there. You got a lot of power now. You got a lot of resources. And that happens every now and then, you know. You have a team back there, and that's what the ideal is, having a team back there. The faster and the more collaboratively we work, the better the outcome, over and over again. The longer we wait, the worse the outcome, over and over again. I saw Mike Johnson, who's a retired detective from Plano, Texas, as a national speaker, and he asked the same question for 20 years, and he says, you know, when's the kid goes to school, says Uncle Nunzio, goes to her guidance counselor, says Uncle Nunzio comes down, licks me, etc. When's the best time to interview the girl? Tomorrow, later, in the afternoon, when she gets out of school? No. Now! When's the best time to go get Uncle Nunzio? And when he gets off of work, once we identify where he is? No. Now! When's the best time to go track down Grandma? Now! Later is never good enough. Especially in these cases. Look, if a woman was walking out of Willowbrook Mall and someone grabbed her purse, you know, we certainly want to talk to her right away, but if there's a collateral witness or somebody goes, oh, the lady in the sporting goods store saw it, you know, well, we'll interview her tomorrow morning, and that's fine. That could be okay. You can even talk to the witness exhaustively the next day, because there aren't a group of people who have an incentive to lie and to change their stories, but you have that in intrafamilial cases. The dynamics and the emotional responses of family members to the law enforcement and child protection involvement are disruptive and have one goal in mind: to make it all go away in nearly every case. And if you wait till tomorrow, those seeds have long been sown and the story will be much different. In fact, they'll probably say something different. Child will probably recant in the morning. So immediate response is critical for a lot of reasons. Law enforcement, one thing that the CPS, you know, we don't divide the responsibility for collecting physical evidence. You know, that would be law enforcement's role. But we work collaboratively. So that's the model from Professor Fowler, the joint investigation model interview. The child gets interviewed among others. Right? It's not only the child that's interviewed. That's the child interview model. This is a joint investigative model. The child gets interviewed, so do all these collaterals. Yes, Frank?
What happens on the legal side when the child makes a full disclosure and then, let's say a couple weeks later, she recants or he recants? What happens there?
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that later in the course, but that's a good question. And unfortunately, for the child, it is a new trauma that they're experiencing because they have now come to law enforcement and to child protection and to the system saying something is not so when in fact it is. So they have to come in and lie about their own exploitation. So there's nothing sadder than a child having to take back, knowing that it's going to start all over again. There's no greater burden on a child than the one to save the family they must recant. So that's the sad part. The good part, I guess, is that the case doesn't go away. In most professional offices and in most prosecutors' offices, we continue prosecuting, and we're very successful. Because if you immediately respond, and you document the child's statements, we record all the statements under 12. And if they're over 12, we take an exhaustive typewritten statement. So you have that other statement. If a kid comes in and says they made it all up and it wasn't true, and here's why, we're allowed to put in their video we're allowed to put in the video in most cases anyway, if they're under 12. But we're certainly allowed to put in their statement if they're over 12, and we can prosecute. And we're very successful with those. Because it's not too hard to investigate recantations and identify what caused the recantation. So Franklin, what we do is we then bring the child in, we interview her again, and we usually say something like, Gabriella, we talked a real long time the other day, and you told me that these things happened, and you told me, and you even get into a little bit of specifics to remind her that Uncle Nunzio does this and that and the other thing. And I believed you. And I believe you now. And I know these things happen. And I know that you're saying they didn't happen now. I just choose to not believe that. I believe what you told me the other day. But I understand why you're saying it didn't happen. It's okay. It's okay. I just need to know if there's a reason why you made this up. And the goal there is to find out what their purpose was in fabricating an allegation against someone they love, trust, and live with. And nearly all the time, except with teenagers, it doesn't work so well. Yeah. But nearly all the time with 12 and under, 13 and under, the reason they lied in the first place is utterly disproportionate to the lie itself. Dad wouldn't let me ride my new bike. I wasn't allowed to get a new dress, or I didn't clean my room good, and Dad yelled at me for not cleaning my room good. So you accused him of putting his penis in your mouth and ejaculating in it. They're transparent. With teens, it gets a little dicey because they'll go, I didn't want my dad to know I was sleeping with drug dealers. Okay, juries. That makes sense to juries. There may even be true. And it just makes that witness's credibility and believability that much worse. That clutters the record. But in many cases, it's not as damaging as that. And in some cases, it's so silly that it proves that the recantation is a hoax and the original accusation was legitimate. But there's even more to it than that. You need to talk to the non-offending caregiver. In nearly all cases, you'll see that they are not employed. You will also find that the accused was employed and that he was the sole source of income or the sole source of their economic and familial stability in nearly every case. So you document that. I can guarantee you, if not in every case or nearly every case, that you can go to your county jail and get the visitation logs, and you will see not one, not two, but multiple visits from the non-offending caregiver to the suspect. Well, that is indicative of a lack of support. You'll see it on the day after they were arrested. Now, somebody might say, well, she don't know what to believe. Well, she doesn't know what to believe. That's okay, but she doesn't support the kid. And if the kid doesn't get the sense they're being supported, and in fact, the opposite message is there, that I'm not believed or that he's being supported, the kid's going to want to take it back. I mean, that all plays into how the kid feels about telling. And you could put an expert on in front of the jury, Franklin, to say these things. It's very compelling, and we win. We've never lost one. These guys get convicted left and right and left and right. And the good news is the kid doesn't testify. Our worst witness is typically the kid, and she goes and nothing happened. The defense lawyer goes, oh, you're my favorite witness. I'm not going to cross-examine you. I go, thank you for coming. Play the video. So these are, these are cases that are very prosecutable. In some ways, arguably easier to prosecute. In the Passaic County now, for the past 5 years, all the visits are video recorded. So mom's sobbing there, and about half the time, guess who's with mom? The victim! At the county jail visiting the accused, because mom dragged her there. Well, you can line up the reasons for recantation in front of that jury. And it's a great day because, as a prosecutor, you talk about facts and things. I get to be an expert. I get to line this information up, put an expert on it, tell the jury, how these interesting things occur in families. And I get to be forceful and passionate about it. And these guys, they get convicted.
What kind of legal representation these alleged offenders have in comparison to the prosecutor?
Well, they either can afford their own lawyer or they can get a public defender. And, contrary to people's perceptions, most public defenders are very good advocates. They're seasoned. I mean, they're in and out of the courthouse every day. They try a million cases. There's no substitute for experience. And if you want a trial lawyer, the public defenders are the most experienced trial lawyers in anywhere you can imagine. They're good lawyers. Now, among them, there's variability. Even among private lawyers. If you took a big pile of private lawyers, you put all their names in a computer, and you spit out a private lawyer's name, chances are you might not get a good one. Not because he's a private lawyer and you're paying for him, or a public lawyer and he's free. Because people are just... Some are competent, some aren't competent. So you can get a public defender or you can get your own lawyer. Some of these private lawyers are very, very effective and very good. They do their homework. Certainly the incentive that's caused by being paid may make the outcome potentially better. But simply because you have a public defender doesn't mean you're not going to get a good representation. And the public defenders are more likely to have had a few child abuse cases in the past couple of years. A lot of private lawyers avoid these cases. And maybe they get 1 or 2 in their career. A public defender can have 30 of these in their career. And again, experience is the best teacher. So you get all kinds that represent these guys. But they're,
From my experience, I find it is more challenging to be a judge. It's more challenging when you work in certain neighborhoods because before you can get out there, they're locked up there. The crime is not easily accessible because the law is there. And I just wonder how does that impact on one's case.
Well, are you suggesting that in more affluent areas they tend to lawyer up?
Yes.
Right. Well, I don't think that's really a function of affluence. It is and it isn't. And here's my theory on it. I know what you're suggesting, and I think there's merit to it. If you delay, and if you're going to a less affluent area, less sophisticated folks, and you wait 2 or 3 days, and then you go pick up the guy, Uncle Nunzio from Sicily, you go down to somewhere in Newark and pick up Uncle Nunzio 4 days later, he probably still don't have a lawyer. But if Uncle Nunzio is the vice president of Verizon Communications, and you wait 2 or 3 days, and this, the potential for criminal investigation is out there, and they hear about it in the family, Uncle Nunzio from Verizon Communications has a lawyer by day 3. How do we get the potential for them to have lawyers and not have lawyers pretty close to even wherever you are? By responding immediately. If a little girl who goes to Newark Academy in Livingston makes a disclosure, freshman girl there makes a disclosure about being molested by Uncle Nunzio, who's the vice president of Verizon Communications, at 10 in the morning, and we go pick her up, and we get mom, and we do everything we do exactly the way we do it immediately. We debrief her. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we have a solid statement by that girl. We get Uncle Nunzio coming back from lunch. We put him in a squad car. We bring him there. He don't know what hit him. And he's more likely to want to talk. It's the time, because perhaps, arguably, among the more affluent, they're more experienced. They have more access to lawyers. They may even have a lawyer they've used in the past for different things. So when a day or two goes by and they have time to reflect, they're going to call that lawyer. And they're going to get a whiff of an investigation. Everyone, whether you're in the inner city or an affluent area or less affluent area, if the police were there on day 1, snooping around, by day 2 and 3, they know something's up. Whether you're in Short Hills, or Elizabeth, they know something's up. But the guy in Elizabeth is probably less likely to have access to lawyers, experience with lawyers' representation, and is less likely to have a lawyer on day 3, where the guy in Short Hills is going to have called a lawyer by now in most cases. So I think that's what's happening. But if you respond immediately... What's that?
No, I was saying you
a chance to get a lawyer, whether...
Well, the chances are they're not going to have a lawyer, and it really is related to the belief that it's just people's narcissism, their self-centeredness. They think they can talk their way out of things. The smartest guys in the world talk. You'd be so shocked at how many people talk. If you look at judges and lawyers and doctors, we picked up a doctor last week. I think I mentioned it maybe the first class. We picked up that doctor that day. This is the third time we arrested him, and he still talked. Now that's stupid. The last 2 times he got arrested. I mean, but there's this ego has to have taken over that thinks, and that's a good way to interrogate. We sell hope. I just want your side of the story. Have a seat. I don't believe her. She's a wild kid. I want to believe you, but even though she's wild, she's telling me one story, I ain't hearing nothing from you. So, but if a day or 2 goes by, they're not going to bite on that kind of stuff. Go ahead.
I just was curious at that point. You look at the little girl in Livingston, and you're going to question her. Is she being questioned now in a police station, or is she being questioned in a child advocacy center? Like, what supports?
No, she would be at the. Well, it depends. In Essex County, it could be anywhere. But if it's a team investigation, if it's Passaic County or counties that have most counties do. Essex, unfortunately, because of the overwhelming numbers, just doesn't. But they go to the Child Advocacy Center. They go for some safe, neutral, friendly place to get interviewed. The Child Advocacy. Not always, but
A parent doesn't have to agree to have her taken out of school at that point? You
Well-
would do it without a parent's consent?
no, we would get the parent contemporaneously. And if all else fails, then we would send our interviewer to the school
I see.
with DIFAS. DIFAS is allowed to interview kids at the school.
Right.
Right? That's fortunately a lot of interviews go on at the school. So, law enforcement, we work collaboratively with DIFAS. So if we can't get the caregiver, and the principal won't release the child, sometimes you go in and the principal, I don't really give a damn. I'm telling to say it for all to hear. I don't give a damn. If there's a clear statement about abuse and it's reasonable, I'm going to get that child out of the school. Now, sometimes the principals go, you're not taking this child, and I don't go, well, I'm going to fight. Okay. So then we get the parental consent. If we don't get the parental consent, then we attempt to interview the kid at the school. But my goal is to get that child out of the school and interviewed in a safe place, away from the influence of the molester or anyone who's allied with the molester. And I don't care how fancy mom is, or where she grew up, or where she lives, their potential for her to be allied with the offender is significant. But I don't endorse being combative. That doesn't work. But if you have to be, sometimes you have to be, not so much combative, but you have to be assertive. The goal is to contact mom and tell her that their daughter made a statement, it's serious, and we need to talk to her about that, and we can't do it here, and we're the police. And most people they respect the police still, believe it or not. They'll do what you ask them to do. And you find in affluent areas, in upper middle class, and affluent, even upper class areas, they turn on you quick too. But by then, they're going to lose. They can bring in all the fancy lawyers they want. The law and logic and what's reasonable and what's fair and what's in the interest of the child will win the day. You just need someone who can articulate those issues. And I am able to do that, and my staff is, hopefully, and we're able to do that. And what's right will happen. I mean, all we want to do is get information. I mean, it's not like, we're trying to hurt people. But you do get flack. It's not that easy, especially in upper middle class and middle class communities, if you don't respond right away and you don't manage this stuff. Now, we'll talk more about that later in the course, but go ahead.
I had a 12-year-old girl. She disclosed to a teacher aide sexual abuse. The school then contacted the mom, shared with her the information. By that time, the mom had an opportunity to speak to her daughter because they're illegal. The perp is a maternal cousin or something. So it was wrong. They called DIFAS. So, of course, by the time I made contact with the child recanted.
Yeah.
But the good thing was the teacher aide actually documented what the child said to her. and I was able to pull out some things from the child where she just kept going back to, I misinterpreted what he said, or it was a language that she used at her age. I said, how would she even know a word like that?
Right.
And she just kept, no, she said, I misunderstood. No, I just misunderstood. But further, as we spoke, it went from being a little touch here to a touch on my breast.
Yeah.
So it was just, I still got what I wanted. And of course, the cousin tried to appeal and nothing happened.
Yeah.
It wasn't overturned.
Well, you identified one of the other things. I mean, in order to do, then we're veering into competent investigations, and forensic interviewing is part of that, and joint interviewing is the topic we're on, so it's appropriate. But, immediate response is important for a lot of reasons. One of which is the sooner you respond. I mean, we're talking about getting a lawyer and all kind of kids recanting, and the mother putting pressure on a child and the siblings, and all that kind of stuff can happen. But even when you respond right away, you might have people who compromise the integrity of the investigation, like school personnel and the others. Everybody's got to be a partner in this. And there needs to not only be a protocol among child protection and law enforcement, but also with educators. And, in Passaic County, we went out to the schools. And again, it was an insurmountable task, and we never finished it. So I produced a video that communicates to the schools. It's called the Do's and Don'ts of Child Sexual Abuse Disclosure, and it communicates to them what their role is. And their role is not to contact the parent caregiver. In fact, our forensic interviewers on camera, we have psychologists and doctors, and the overriding theme is call us and let us do our thing. Don't you get involved. You just accept the information, and we talk about how to do that. And then there's things like one of the do nots is don't confront the offender. All right, that one seems intuitive, right? Why would we do that? They might, because they know them. Don't call the parent or the caregiver. You may think, and this is what I say on the video, I do this, you may think you're doing a good thing. You're not. You don't know whether that parent is involved in it, or knew about it, or is doing things to the child herself. Now, you may not want to think that women or caregivers molest, but that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about cases where people take advantage of children, and you have no idea what she may do or what she's done in the past. The last thing you want to do is call the caregiver. I know you want to do that. I know you think it's the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to do. It's never the right thing to do. Leave that to DIFAS and us, and that's kind of the message that we give them. And that doesn't always work. I mean, they still do it from time to time. There's turnover and different principals and different staff, and and the people, I know her, she's so nice. Okay? Yes?
I was saying that in certain areas you find that parents or caregivers have a better relationship. So, they know each other by the first thing, they're very involved. And even though you make a shorter video, it's not their role to call the parents. A lot of times the parents get wind of it.
Yeah, but we can only do what we can do. So you're making the observation that despite our best efforts at educating people and expressing to them how negative an impact it could have on the child's health and the outcome of any case, if we express that emphatically to the schools, you're saying, hey, you know what? Some schools, they still do it. The relationships are so highly developed that either they get wind of it or they ignore it. And that's true. But that's not an argument to not tell them at all, right? So we tell them, and we do our best. And if some of them ignore it, and then I believe it's up to us, the chief law enforcement officer in the community where these schools are, to hold them accountable for that, I'm not talking about charging them, but to raise it to their superiors and to raise it among their peers. You're going to be held accountable for it if you're going to do that kind of thing. And it happens over and over, even today. Not everyone's seen this video yet. I haven't even been able to distribute the video. I've been sitting in a closet for 3 years. I've been trying to, get the people and the energy to get it out there. But I've shared it with some, and we used to go in person and talk to schools. After work for an hour. We did it beginning of my career, we did like 60, 70 schools, and I only did about 1/5 of Patterson, never mind the rest of the county. And it took me 3 years. So that's when I figured we might as well do a video. But you know what? We can't control everything in all people's behavior, but we can certainly attempt to leverage our advantages the best we can so we get the best outcome. And I'm sure if you compare two towns, one that has communicated with the schools and one that hasn't, you should find better outcomes. But I'm not a researcher, so I wouldn't know. But anyway, let's move on to the other models real quick that Fowler talks about. The joint investigation model. Then there's this oddball parent-child interaction model. That sprung from the belief that clinicians are real good at predicting things and discerning child abuse. It had validity and some traction when used in the area of neglect and physical abuse and family violence. And the idea was that there would be an attempt to have a session where the parent and the child interact with one another, and they're watched independently by a therapist or a clinician, and watch the way the kids and the caregivers interact. And there were some assumptions about how kids might interact with people who are beating them or hurting them or exploiting them or ignoring them. Some of these failure to thrive cases were exactly the kind of case where clinicians felt that watching a parent and child interact and drawing conclusions from the behaviors can give them insight into whether there's violence in that home. The idea was that actions speak louder than words. Actions speak louder than words. And whether that was helpful or not, I think it's clear among most professionals that it's not helpful in the child sexual abuse context. And it's probably based upon faulty assumptions. If you're going to put a child in the room with the molester, the assumption is going to be, she's going to be scared of him or not look at him. They love their dads and their uncles. And I just read a letter today from a girl whose father's in jail in an attempt to try to get us to drop the charges or let him out or whatever. I'm not sure what the defense wanted. They wanted a better plea bargain. They give us a 7-page letter by a 13-year-old girl who was, I miss you so much, I got a new prom dress. It was so sad, and I'm going to redact it and make it part of the lesson here. I have an audio that'll make you want to cry too, and it's about post-arrest feelings of the kids, how they feel about the abuse, how they feel about the perpetrator. And in both cases, in both examples, they miss him and they love him, and they want to communicate with him. They want to tell him what's going on in her life. I'm reading today about her prom dress, and she's in his class, and she's doing a science project where she's working on a dissecting a pig, and it was really gross, Dad, and this and that, and it's a kid talking to her dad. This happens, 1/100th of their existence in any given week. He comes in her room for an hour and messes with her, and it's disgusting, and she hates it, and so much so that she told one day and wanted it to stop, and so much so that, unfortunately, the impact of it, the legacy of the molest, will last with her a lifetime, and she can't even begin to appreciate how distorted her life may become. But nevertheless, despite all that, it only happens over the course of a short period of time. Sometimes the other 99% of their life with their dad or their uncle or whoever this trusted other is great. And in many cases, they're great guys. They're not always brutal and mean and disciplinarians. In many cases, they're. One of the lines she wrote was, "We miss you so much, we want you back. We don't want my dad back. You're the best." So this is a comparison between whatever her biological dad was back and this dude. "We were just mad that night because you hit Mom." You show this to 20 average people, they can't fathom how this is the desirable dad. The one who hit Mom and got taken out of the house, and then the kid disclosed the abuse, and he confessed. What could the dad have been like? But back to my point here is the assumption is that these kids are going to interact with the perpetrator or the mother or whomever they're going to put in a room, and the clinician's going to watch from behind a mirror or on video nowadays and conclude something. But I think it's based upon assumptions that are erroneous, that kids are going to act scared or afraid or avoid eye contact or be upset in some way if they're sitting in a room with the guy who molests them, if it's their dad or a caregiver or a stepdad. Anyway, as Professor Fowler points out, the model is not widely espoused by clinicians evaluating sexual abuse. The guidelines for the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry do not recommend suspect child interviews. And I don't believe they're too keen on the parent interaction model either. The last model that Professor Fowler talks about is the comprehensive assessment model. And that's something that you might see at Winona's house in Essex County at the Regional Diagnostic Center, or the Audrey Hepburn Children's House in Hackensack at the University Medical Center, or Dorothy B. Hirsch or Child Cares. Dorothy B. Hirsch is in New Brunswick, and Child Cares is in Camden. These are centers where you have psychologists, social workers, forensic pediatricians, and there are 4 of them in New Jersey, and they're designed to do a comprehensive assessment. They'll get the police reports, the videos, they'll do a mental health screening of the child, of the caregiver, of the siblings. Many cases are referred there from DIFAS. It's an interdisciplinary, complete assessment, not only for sexual abuse, but the level of functioning of the family members. But that's not a good model for the day-to-day investigation where a kid is abused and sitting in the principal's office. These are assessments that have the luxury of time, and they're comprehensive, and they're very, very good, and they're ideal. One thing I'll tell you right now, and we'll talk more about these interview models in a different way later, but the best way to interview kids is in multiple sessions by a single, well-trained interviewer. We just don't have the luxury of doing that in the day-to-day forensic case. If you get... A district office gets 5 sexual abuse cases a week, and you got to interview them 3 times, now it's 15. You just tripled the number of cases. You get 1 shot in forensics to interview the child. Now, sometimes you might bring the kid back, and out in Chicago I learned about the protocol that I'm part of has developed a multiple session model for some cases. This is a little bit different. This is not only to find out if something happened, but more about psychological assessments of everybody. Siblings, caregivers, the children, foster parents. And it's really about intrafamilial abuse. So they not only answer whether the child has been sexually abused, but whether there are treatment needs for any one of the parties. And the model is empirically supported. The research supports the model. Yes?
Oh, I just thought it was a little bit too much with the whole, I like comprehensive, but my personal experience, I think it can be a little bit too much for the children because it then leads to fantasy. The children were interviewed by the prosecutors, video, CAC interview, then the psychosocial, then the medical, you're being interviewed a 3rd time. By that time, the child has already given us some grandiose story. Not to say that the initial time the child disclosed was not probably true, but it was just after the 3rd time, it was a lot more fantasy when they started questioning the child again about the same scenario about what happened.
Yeah, well, you know, we don't recommend multiple interviews, but chances are the case, it sounds like you're thinking of a particular case, and
Yes.
yeah, and if it winds up at the Regional Diagnostic Center for a comprehensive assessment, chances are the original interview by the prosecutor's office was was not good enough. Well, not good enough. It didn't inform what happened. There wasn't enough learned from that. It was the outcome wasn't good. The interview that the prosecutor's office didn't get persuasive information. And I bet you the kid was under 6, right?
5, they did disclose.
Right, but they were under 6, right? Yeah. And the reason I say that is because it's usually the little kids that, well, they made a disclosure, but I bet you the prosecutor didn't find it was. Did they charge immediately?
Yes.
Oh, they did charge?
Absolutely.
So then they sent the family there for follow-up care then. Oh, that's different then. I was wrong, and that's different from my experience. Although the comprehensive model is also for follow-up care. I'm not sure what caused the child to... See, what's supposed to happen is, if you do the interview on video, we share the videos in my region with the Children's House. So we give the video, it's not even on disc anymore, it's a computer file. We email it sometimes. So we give the video, we share the video. So now the psychologist and the doctors can see that. So then they focus on what they need to ask questions about. And that's one way to minimize the impact of multiple interviews, right? Because what happened is relevant to the doctor. But if they can learn what happened from the mouth of the child without asking them, simply by looking at a video, that's helpful. And they do. We share videos all the time. And the psychologist, if you're going to give follow-up treatment, you still need to talk to the child. And sometimes, you know, you may have a bad outcome. And I think that if you looked at the majority of cases, you're going to find that the comprehensive model for following up with the families is the right way to handle it. Because these are trained. Otherwise, is to do it piecemeal or do nothing at all. You know, and these models are, you know, my mother had lung cancer. She went to Sloan Kettering. She had a doctor, but she had a team of doctors. And, you know, every couple of weeks they would meet on all the cases, just like the multidisciplinary team. And, you know, they were all part of the same working group. And this guy, the oncologist, worked with the radiologist who worked with the eye doctor, worked with this, and the brain doctor and all that. And they weren't going to different hospitals. It was all part of the same working group, which tends to have better outcomes. But certainly multiple interviews are not good, and they could lead to a child going off to La La Land. And we'll look at that later in this course. Is anyone here a supervisor, a DIFAS supervisor? Okay, what's your first name again? Amy. Amy, are you from Hudson County? Mars? Do you go to the MDT meetings?
No.
How many district offices in Mars?
2.
2. Like us, Passaic County. Does someone from your district office go? It's just a different supervisor. Okay. Because at these meetings, you know, and Mars comes to Audrey Hepburn Children's House too. At these meetings, you know, that we bring that up at every case we review. Like, all right, well, should we send them to the Children's House, or in Essex it will be Winona's house, and things like that. Anyway, any questions about the assessment models that we talked about? Go ahead.
If a child discloses, but it's not an emergency situation, like a child discloses to a foster parent and the child is safe in the foster home,
Right.
does that child go to, I mean, do you have the immediate response of get the child interviewed, get the parent interviewed, or would you do more of this kind of comprehensive assessment model in that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. No, from law enforcement's perspective, the job of developing evidence would still be law enforcement's collaboratively with child protection. The comprehensive model is not really an evidence-gathering model, although sometimes it may be. In the example here, the kid had already disclosed, and the child went to the comprehensive model for follow-up. And sometimes in follow-up, you learn about additional molests. You learn about other perpetrators, other victims. So even though the comprehensive model is more about treatment and less about fact-finding, they need to find facts to treat. And often they find facts that are unknown and actionable. The other common way that cases get there is if the kid makes no disclosure to us, but there's a big suspicion. 4-year-old with gonorrhea, no disclosure. Perpetrator denies. We know the kid's been molested. We have a high suspicion. Child goes, mother goes, family goes to the children's house. They get evaluated and treated. And then that child may make a disclosure later, and we may revisit the case and then arrest the perpetrator. But you're saying, well, what if a kid's in foster care and they're there because mother's neglectful and they're in foster care because of that? She can't care for her kids. And then the kid discloses that mom's 2 boyfriends ago molested her. Making up facts for you, but and the kid's in foster care, mom's in a drug program, and do we go out, pick up mom, everybody? The short answer is no. That one we have the luxury of a little time. Now, you can't really wait too much there either. You don't know if the kid's going to have a visit, or if she's old enough she could call mom or text her, those kind of things. We have to be confident that people are going to keep quiet about what's about to unfold. But no, the answer in 99% of the cases, we'll do that tomorrow morning. But when the integrity of the case is involved, when the flow of information is unmanageable, in that case it's arguably manageable, the flow of information. But when it's not manageable, no matter what we do, we just swoop down immediately. It's the only way. It's very effective, and sometimes it's not. It's very effective. I mean, you get to where you need to be. You interview everybody, nothing happened. I mean, I'm not all about. Not every case is true. Some of them aren't true. But that's when you're going to get the most unadulterated, unvarnished, untainted information. Once people start talking to one another, facts change. People begin to give you the biased version. People's statements about facts are now influenced by their concerns about other people and about themselves. So we try to respond immediately. But in a case where kids in foster care, or where we can manage the information, it's not perfect. Information may get out, but if we have a reasonable chance of managing the information, I can't have people getting overtime all hours of the night and all that, and people going out and compromising what we're doing right now to react immediately. It's the payoff is not that great. Some other questions about I want to talk a little bit about the article by Philip Rich, about unhealthy sexualization or sexual behavior in kids. Someone mentioned it before. Your readings, which aren't done for today. So that's good. Recognizing healthy sexual development. What are some examples of inappropriate sexual behavior by children? If a 4-year-old is rubbing her vagina and stimulating herself, is that a red flag for sexual abuse? It could be. It could be. What about masturbation and children make it more likely or less likely that it's abuse, that there's abuse behind it? Go ahead, Frank.
Before it makes it, you get suspicious before their time, or puberty time?
Well, you would think that, but you know what? Masturbation happens in all ages. Even little babies play with themselves. So there's not a real correlation between age and masturbation being indicative of abuse. But go ahead. Did you raise your finger or something?
Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, think about it for a minute. You have a 7-year-old girl, we'll say, and she's observed touching her vagina and masturbating 2 or 3 times in the past year. Now that she could be being molested, but the masturbation really isn't what's concerning, right? I mean, we know that kids masturbate, even 7-year-olds and little ones and teens and everybody else, right? So what might be greater cause for concern? I'm focused on, what's your first name? Michelle, what do you think? Change the facts of my masturbation scenario. What would a 7-year-old do in connection with masturbation that would make you more concerned?
If they're using noises that are above their age.
Okay, if they're making noises or saying things contemporaneous that are beyond their age.
Or maybe hiding it, because kids don't hide things very well.
Yeah, you would think they may hide it because they kind of feel that they kind of have an innate sense it's wrong, but certainly, actually, if they weren't hiding, I don't know about hiding, that's an interesting one, because if they weren't hiding it, you might think they're molested or whatever, but you want to know how they're hiding it, how they're reacting. What else about the masturbation? Hiding it, maybe saying something at the same time. Go ahead.
Objects.
If they're using objects, that's unusual for children, that they're going to go get an object to stimulate themselves. That's concerning. That's excellent. What about, in my hypothetical, I said she was observed 2 or 3 times over the past year masturbating. How would you change the facts, Michelle, to make it more concerning?
If it was more often.
Yeah. Excessive masturbation, right? If it's more often, we're concerned. Objects, contemporaneous statements, right? You can fill in the blank, something crude. And now that crude statement might be informative, even without the masturbation. But with the masturbation and a crude statement, you got serious cause for concern. I remember early in my career, before I was even in child abuse, the defense lawyer scoffing at the quality of my case. He was a great lawyer too, Billy DeMarco. He passed away. He was a good guy, but he was a defense lawyer, and he was like, he made some crude comments about the mother of my victim privately in chambers with the judge. We were talking off the record kind of deal, and he was mocking the quality of my victim, who was 8 or 9 years old, saying that she was observed masturbating on the shopping cart in King's or ShopRite or A&P or something. And his suggestion was that this is a screwed up child who's incapable of being believed, and she's not going to make a good witness. She's rubbing her, filling the crude word in the shopping center, laughing about it. But that's exactly the kind of fact that corroborates her victimization. And I even felt that back then. Now I know it. I mean, that's the kind of excessive masturbation. The girl goes shopping with her mother and she's rubbing her privates on the cart to stimulate herself. That is suggestive of something serious, right? What are other inappropriate sexual behaviors of children that are beyond sexual exploration? Franklin?
What about kids' movements? I remember seeing a boy, use the word humping, like he will hump like almost anything he sees, or even hump his little sister.
Well, again, that is excessive preoccupation with sexual activity, which is kind of like masturbation. It's one thing a kid does a humping move and he does it awkwardly or whatever. It's another thing if he's preoccupied. And I think what you're suggesting is there's some, behaviors that are unique to human sexuality. If he puts if he puts his sister in the doggy style position or something, manipulates her body there, those kind of things are beyond their understanding. They're very sexual, and they may inform us about what's going on here. So certainly the behavior of the child, the excessiveness of their sexual interest, whether they engage in sexual behavior in public, like the little girl with the carriage and all that. That's the kind of, Michelle, the thing about hiding it. You'd think they might want to hide it, but if they're so, their sense of sexuality is so distorted that they're masturbating in public or on shopping carts. That's more concern, I think, than if they're hiding it. I think hiding it is probably kind of normal. What other kind of things does he talk about, or do you know about sexual behavior? Go ahead.
Attempting to have sexual contact with children within their age or younger.
Yes, excellent. Yeah. Again, you're always concerned about the assertion that this is simple childhood exploration, right? And that's real. We get a lot of, you're charging this kid, or you're going in this household and DIFUS, and it's just sexual exploration. That's what the parents want us to believe in some cases. And we're like, look, this is not sexual exploration. But there is something cool that, two little kids get together without any adult influence, and they discover their privates, and they, and if it's not excessive, you're not too concerned about it. You need to educate, you need to intervene. But having an interest in a much older child or a much younger child is cause for concern. That's not normal. That's not sexual exploration. Kids who are involved in sexual exploration typically do so with an age mate or a peer. Now, the older boy, arguably, some would argue it might be doing some sexual exploration. Depends on how old they are. But if the child seeks out significantly older or significantly younger, it's cause for concern. And they may even seek out what? Not only kids, but animals and adults. And that's cause for concern. I mean, you get the little girl sitting on her uncle's lap, and she's... you get these cases now and then where the perpetrator says, she came on to me, and people are, that's disgusting. That couldn't have never happened. And they're like, no, she started to rub her vagina on me, and this and that, and I got aroused, and, and I did this, that, and the other thing. Well, that's very credible. I mean, especially if the kid's been previously molested. The child is what we describe as sexualized. It is very, very likely that they were the sexual initiator, and that they were engaging in this sexualized behavior with an adult. And it manifests itself in a variety of ways. Go ahead in the back, yeah.
In addition, I was just going to add what they say, unwilling children, when they're trying to include a child that's not willing.
Excellent point. Even among peers. So it's cause for concern if some child interacts sexually with any other human or person and does it forcibly and without permission and against the will. Right? If the other person's not into it and they do it anyway, that's cause for concern. Because most kids are going to back off. That's cause for concern, that they will continue to assert themselves sexually on another person when there's objection. Yes?
I had a kid, and he was 9, and the victim was 17, and she accused him of trying to rape her. So when I tried to report it to the prosecutor's office, they kept saying, I think you have the age backwards. And I said, no, he was 9 and she was 17. And he was very graphic. Like, he was saying things like, I had sex with her in a butt because I didn't want to get her pregnant. And, they was trying to find out if he was sexually abusing. I come to find out he got all of this from watching porn. So they don't know if he just was reenacting what he store, or if someone's ever, done it to him, like he didn't disclose ever being abused, and the 17-year-old really admitted that he tried to rape her, and that.
Well, what does she say happened? That he tried to hold her down and put his penis in her?
It was two of them, and they held her down, and he was trying to put her pants down and to put it in her butt because he said that he didn't want to get her pregnant because he's not ready for them kids. At 9 years old, so when I sent the, you faxed it to the prosecutor's office, and they're like, no, I think that you wrote it wrong, and you mean the 17-year-old with the 9? I said, no, the 9-year-old did this with the 17-year-old, and it just was.
And it was 2 9-year-olds that held her down?
Yeah, one was 9, one was 10, they were both boys, and she was in a home visiting a sister that was like 16, so she was 17, and the parents wasn't home, so they was playing, and that turned into him.
Well, it's right. Certainly. Well, I don't know how law enforcement would have dealt with it. I know how I probably would have dealt with it. But the most concerning aspect of it is, what's the environment this 9-year-old's growing up in? I mean, is he in fact influenced by pornography? I mean, that's a very common cop-out too. Oh, they saw pornography. That's what influenced me. But that nowadays it's so accessible. Right? I mean, these kids got iPod touches. They could be 9 and watching the most graphic forms of porn imaginable on the planet. So that could be the case. So one needs to go and see what kind of environment that he's, right? And I'm sure that's what happened, right? Did he live in a dysfunctional house?
Well, when he went to visit his father, that's when he saw it.
Well, his father's...
He watched porn. That was the story.
Yeah. So dad's house?
Yeah, not as.
Yeah.
I'm interested in finding out, how was this reported? I mean, I just say the name, just the source.
It was reported by another child that was in the home. Her mother called it in to report concerns because the daughter went home and told the mother what happened.
17-year-old?
No, it was another child in the home. But they didn't try to do anything to her. She just witnessed it and she wanted to. Her mother.
What's the point of a 17-year-old?
So it was spin-off?
Is a parent, in that scenario, is a parent in any way liable for what their child what their child views? If a child is viewing pornography, is it against the law?
Yeah, I'm not so sure there was an aggressive investigation into what Dad's house was like. I'm sure he said, oh yeah, I got dirty magazines here. He probably looked at those. And how did the kid consume the pornography? On the computer?
No, he said Dad had a DVD and that he was watching.
A single
They don't
DVD?
really talk about not getting pregnant during anal sex on porno. No porno that I've ever seen in my life
Or that if you do it in the butt, that.
That's a good observation, though. That's not something you're going to learn. You're going to learn that from the street more than you're going to learn it from pornography. But yeah, I mean, it's a legitimate inquiry, and that's neglect. That's a form of neglect. If that's true, if Dad has graphic pornography and doesn't keep it out of the hands of his 9-year-old and doesn't secure it, that's like leaving medicine on the kitchen table and pornography in the kitchen table. Whatever you want to do, it's harmful to the kid. There's no doubt about it. Look what it's doing. Arguably, yes.
I was going to say I had one of my mothers was substantiated because they were living like one family on the first floor, the other family on the second floor, and the 9-year-old boy, this is the first time they were living like this, and they had like every cable channel. So he was watching porn, and he would have anal sex. He was not have anal sex with his 6-year-old female cousin. And everyone thinking that something happened to him, but like there's absolutely no disclosure. He was just like, I just saw it on TV. And he actually, people had to move, and he had to go get like 3-4 months of psychotherapy, and I think he was actually, someone in there was charged with child endangerment. I just can't remember who it was, but. And this mother, thinking that while she's in the shower, the kid's upstairs with the other aunt and vice versa, and while I'm doing laundry, the kid's coming downstairs, this was, happening under their eyes, and she was substantiated.
Yeah, I'm always skeptical of I've learned it on porn, but it's certainly possible. Kids do mimic what they see on TV. This is something that's unusual to them and interesting, I imagine, and it's possible. But, out of all the things, I mean, anal, of all the things you can watch on pornography, to want to reproduce and mimic the anal intercourse just doesn't seem like the first stop of someone who's just learned about sex. I mean, it's not an act that's easy to complete. It's hurtful to the other party in many cases. I mean, licking, sucking, touching, that seems to be, if you had to think about what a kid would mimic. But I don't know. I don't profess to have expertise here. It just doesn't seem intuitive to me that that's what they would pick on. Of all the things, it's not that easy to accomplish anal sex. Now, if you're socialized that way because you were victimized that way, then that might be much easier to reenact, because that's what you learned. But I don't know. Every one of these cases, I wouldn't be so quick to believe they learned it from porn. I would scrutinize it in depth. One more comment, and then we'll break.
This might be a little bit of a reach, but I'm just curious. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but a sexually reactive child, one that was not exposed to sexual abuse, but may have observed child pornography or may have seen sexual acting out with mom and dad, is this a child that may grow up to be someone who preys on other people as an adult? Like, I don't...
So what you're saying is a child who was molested?
I guess grow up to become...
Will they grow up to be a molester? Yeah, you know what? Again, I'm not an...
Something that they saw as a child. I don't know. As I'm reaching, I'm just...
Well, no, it's a good question, and a lot of people bring it up. And, I don't know about somebody who's merely observed human sexuality growing up to be a molester. I mean, I don't know about that, but... From my understanding of the research in this area and what mental health professionals would say is the answer is no. Simply because you were molested as a child, even aggressively molested, even terribly molested as a child, it's not a recipe for you to grow up to become a molester. Some kids develop empathy for other kids. They would never do that in a million years. They grow up to be sensitive to that and hyper-vigilant about these things and don't want to hurt other people. Some kids are indifferent about it. And then some kids do grow up to repeat the kind of things that happen to them. So if you took all the kids who were molested as children and counted how many of them turned into molesters themselves, it would be a very small percentage. So the answer is no. However, here's how to distort people's perceptions. If you go to Avenel, which is if you go to the Adult Diagnostic and Treatment Center, where all of the repetitive compulsive sex offenders are warehoused in Rahway, right? It's a prison for sex offenders, the worst of the worst. If you went there, and let's say there were 500 of them there, right, at any given moment. I don't know how many there are. Let's say there's 500 inmates. If you take 500 child molesters and you interview them about their familial and social history, 99% of them will have been molested as children. But you see what I'm saying? You're taking a sample of molesters, and nearly all of them were molested themselves. Right? If you went and interviewed all women in the sex industry, if you went and interviewed all women at strip clubs, nude strip clubs, you would probably find that 90% of them were molested as children by their caregivers or men, or raped or molested by someone. But if you took all of the women who were ever molested, a very small percentage become strippers or in the sex industry, right? You see the difference? But among the universe who's in the sex industry, or among the universe of people who are molesters, nearly all of them were molested. But that's deceiving because it's not everybody. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, it's 10 to 8. Thank you for your attention. I'll see you here next week. Make sure you follow up on what you need to do. The discussion boards are due Thursday and Sunday or Tuesday, whatever Blackboard says. And you have to interview your kids by October 3rd. You have to get in your whatever you're supposed to give me by October 3rd.